The United States has had a history of anti-immigration hate. The Naturalization Act of 1790 limited the right of becoming a naturalized citizen to free white persons. However, this aspect of naturalization slowly expanded to allow whites and blacks to become naturalized Americans. Asians did not fit into these categories, and in Tauko Ozawa v. United States, Japanese immigrants were ruled ineligible for naturalization. Hate had always existed towards the Japanese, but when World War II broke out, there was another surge of anti-Japanese hate. Newspapers falsely reported incoming attacks from the Japanese, and the Seattle Times even published a piece titled, "This is War, Stop Worrying About Hurting Jap Feelings," which publicized malice towards the Japanese people living in California. There was an open hatred against the Japanese by the Americans, which showed the discrimination against the Japanese that had been festering until it came to a head with the December 7th attack on Pearl Harbor. As famously stated by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was a day which will live on in infamy. On that chilly morning, 353 Japanese bombers attacked the U.S. naval base off the coast of Oahu, Hawaii, killing 2,403 while injuring 1,178, and setting in motion what became a massive internment of over 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, including over 70,000 citizens in the western United States. Japanese internment camps sparked debate between those who were marginalized, the Japanese Americans, and those who worried about national security, the U.S. officials and various pressure groups. This debate led to change in the policies governing Japanese people who were forced into internment camps, and sparked debate about the rights bestowed by the U.S. Constitution. Just 74 days after the attack, February 19, 1942, FDR signed Executive Order 9066, which gave power to the military to ban anyone from a 50 to 60 mile wide coastal stretch from Washington to California. While that may not seem to be unreasonable, it also allowed for the transportation of the civilians within that area to be moved to assembly centers set up by California and surrounding states. All of this was seen as necessary to those in charge at the U.S. government. They believed they needed protection against espionage and against sabotage to national defense material, national defense premises, and national defense utilities. While this order was passed according to proper protocol, it was not without internal debate. People within the War Department worried about the need for the drastic measures of moving so many possibly innocent people. Attorney General Francis Biddle was one of the main officials who campaigned against the actions, stating that there is no evidence whatsoever of any reason for disturbing citizens. Those citizens were affected for the rest of their lives due to this campaign. It was something that could have completely been avoided. However, the council paused with respect to wartime policies directed at persons of Japanese ancestry. Here, and elsewhere, Biddle's advice would be ignored. General DeWitt, the commander of the Western Defense Command, the authority entrusted with the Japanese issue, defined 2 military zones which the Japanese were forced out of over time through a series of 108 military proclamations from himself. By June, all Japanese within the military zones were relocated to temporary camps called assembly centers, and by the end of October 1943, those in the assembly centers were transferred to 10 War Relocation Authority detention camps. While imprisonment was obviously unconstitutional, the use of the terms evacuation or relocation muddied the water greatly. These camps were most definitely not country clubs. They were complete with barbed wire fences, guard towers, searchlights, and armed military guards. Miyo Senzaki of Seattle was sent to the Rower, Arkansas internment camp and shared her story with John Teta Ishii in an interview. She said that as soon as her family learned of their relocation, they started to burn all of their Japanese books. They were scared because they had no idea what was going to happen to them. Mio's parents believed that because the children were American citizens, they would be safe. This, ironically, was incorrect because even though they were American citizens, they were still detained. During the process of the relocation, Mio even married just so that she could stay with her partner in the camps. Later in the interview, Mio explained the feeling of being at Roer as lonely, sad, and scary. She said that the inmates all felt like prisoners. When she got pregnant in the camp, she was so bothered by the fact that she conceived in such a terrible place where there would be no opportunity for her child. She thought it would be a crime to carry the baby to term. Mio was on the verge of getting an abortion due to the situation, but she didn't go through with it. When Fred Korematsu was arrested, he believed that internment should be challenged. He believed the camps included too many innocent people. Everyone in the camp deserved a right to a free trial, and they should be allowed due process before being corralled into an internment camp, which was very similar to a prison. Korematsu was indeed guilty of breaking the curfew when he was arrested, but that curfew imposed was unlawful, as it was based on race and not applied to the whole population. While this case was being debated in the courts, FBI investigations were requested. The investigations found that there was no evidence of Japanese espionage, destroying the justification for the internment camps in the first place. This was the turning point for the following case. In the only interview that Endo gave, she explained that she was born in Sacramento, California, in 1920. Her upbringing seemed almost perfect for the role she would later play. Her brother was in the US Army, and her parents never went back to Japan. She herself didn't even speak Japanese. She was a model American, and was a perfect citizen to challenge the existence of internment camps. Endo was picked by the lawyer James Purcell, who worked the case in an effort to reverse the internment camp's existence. Endo mainly played the role of a figurehead in this case, never appearing in court. Despite this, she still had to deal with many of the legal proceedings, and at one point, she was offered a settlement which would allow her to leave the camp, but she did not yield. Her case was taken to the Supreme Court, and this time, the court sided with Endo in its unanimous decision, reversing the precedent set by the previous challengers Hirabayashi, Yasui, and Korematsu. While this was a victory for equality, it was not perfect. The courts tipped off Roosevelt about the decision before it was announced. Roosevelt reacted to this by announcing the closing of the camps. With the closing of the camps, many Japanese still faced public backlash, and Endo herself never moved back to Sacramento, feeling hostility. The internment of Japanese Americans is just one experience in history from which we can learn and attempt to avoid revisiting. This was a dark time in American history, which should never be replicated. Various issues still exist today, such as redlining and racial profiling. The US should take these lessons they have learned from this experience and apply them elsewhere in the years to come. In the quest of equality, these previous missteps provide a good base to understand what does not work and should inform policy for the future.